Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, calculated cruelty in Gaza during the hostage releases and the soft peddling of Hamas's brutality from some media services. Plus, Egyptian military buildup on the Gaza border. And nowhere to run, how anti-Semitism in the UK may have reached a point of no return. Elise Stefanik, the nominee for U.S. ambassador to the UN, articulates how America values its relationship with Israel. Plus, Georgian Banov on how to find comfort during painful times. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl. Israel is outraged by the murder of the Bibas family and the treatment of hostages. In response, they're holding up the release of Palestinian prisoners. Prime Minister Netanyahu is also demanding Hamas end the humiliating transfer ceremonies in Gaza. Now, negotiators are hoping to extend phase 1 of the ceasefire to get more hostages out immediately. Here's the latest. Israel put the release of some 600 Palestinian prisoners on hold to protest Hamas's brutal murders of hostage Shiri Bibas and her children, Ariel and Kfir, whose bodies were returned last week. Israel is also protesting the terror group's humiliation of hostages at staged handover ceremonies in Gaza. The latest outrage is a Hamas propaganda video showing 2 hostages who were brought to Saturday's release of 6 other hostages, but then were taken back into captivity. In the Knesset, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held up photos of the slain Bibases and asked Israeli lawmakers to never forget.
This photo says it all, and I ask you will engrave it on your heart, to always remember what we are fighting against and against who we are fighting.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio wrote on X, Hamas's treatment of hostages, including its brutal murder of the Bibas family, further illustrates their savagery and is yet another reason why we are saying these terrorists must release all of the hostages immediately or be destroyed. Critics are also ripping into the Associated Press for how it's framing the Bibas killings. Democrat lawmaker Richie Torres said on X, the AP chooses to whitewash the baby killers, calling them militants rather than terrorists, and claiming the children died rather than were murdered in captivity. Disgraceful. Republican Senator Mike Lee wrote, Hamas murdered these hostages. They didn't just die in captivity, as if by natural causes. Why does AP want to sugarcoat this? President Trump weighed in after the latest freeing of 6 more hostages this past weekend.
But they're coming back in pretty bad shape. It's a horrible thing, and many are dead. Many are dead. So we'll see how that all ends up.
There's talk of extending phase 1 of the ceasefire deal to get more hostages freed as soon as possible. Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff told CNN that talks for a phase 2 are expected this week.
We do expect it, Jake, to go forward. We have to get an extension of phase 1.
But Trump's national security advisor said on Fox News that Hamas is threatening all by its horrifying actions.
This behavior over this last week with these children, with how these people have been released, this propaganda absolutely is affecting the prospects of negotiations.
Meanwhile, after thwarting last week's terror plot to blow up at least 15 Israeli buses, the IDF is ramping up efforts to destroy the growing terror threat from Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank.
For the first time in decades, in Judea and Samaria, tanks have entered. This means one thing. We fight terrorism by all means and everywhere.
On another front, Israeli military jets flew over the funeral of former Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut. The same day, the IDF also released video of the massive Israeli airstrike that killed Nasrallah back in September. Israel's ambassador to the United States, Yechiel Leiter, is warning about an Egyptian military buildup in the Sinai Peninsula on the Gaza border. CBN international correspondent Gary Lane spoke about that with Josh Haston from the Jewish News Syndicate. Here's an excerpt from CBN's The Global Lane.
So first, what can you tell us about the Israeli ambassador's assertion about the Egyptian troop buildup in the Sinai? Is it true? And if so, why would Egypt be doing that in violation of the Camp David Accords?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And this is a violation of those peace accords, which go back all the way to 1979. At this juncture, we're not exactly sure why the Egyptians are doing so. But Egypt, a country which borders Gaza and Israel, a country which did not let in many of those Gazans who could have been seeking refuge from the war in Gaza. Egypt also turning a blind eye for so many years to the Hamas smuggling tunnels. All of a sudden, they have established a military presence, several brigades down there in the Sinai. Number one, it seems like they're moving into an offensive position. Could they be perhaps trying to lead some sort of attack against Israel? That is our great concern right now. That's number one. Number two, could they be establishing positions there because of the Trump plan, thinking that perhaps, in fact, Gazans will try to flee towards Egypt? That could be a concern of the Egyptians. Now, they've been holding Gazans there, not letting them into Egypt. And all of a sudden, they're playing a role on an international stage, perhaps trying to keep them in Gaza against the Trump plan. They are trying to put together a plan of their own. They'd like to see the Gazans remain in Gaza, unwilling to help their fellow Arab Muslims, instead trying to hold them there as pawns against the state of Israel. So that it could be several of those factors playing in here, and that's the reason perhaps why you have a military buildup, again, in violation of the Israeli-Egyptian peace accords.
Well, the good journalist that you are, and I know from my own experience, I mean, you always look at timing of things. Trump makes the announcement about suggesting possibly moving the people of Gaza into the Sinai, and then this. I mean, was this a sudden buildup, or has it been going on for some time now?
So it's happened before. There have been different instances of it. And unfortunately, Israel has downplayed the significance of past attempts by Egypt to show a military presence. And all of a sudden, they have a new plan, if you will, completely the opposite of what President Trump says he wants to do. That is move the Gazans out of Gaza in order to rebuild, and then the United States would then take over. So all of a sudden, Egypt wants to get involved when they've been quiet for so long, ignoring the plight of the Gazans, ignoring what's going on in that part of the globe.
So is Egypt's plan for Gaza getting any traction? What's the response?
Well, it's a brand new plan right now. I just don't think it's feasible with the situation you have in Gaza. As President Trump has said time and time again, Gaza is in total ruins right now. You have those unexploded munitions right now. It's a very dangerous place to be. So do the Egyptians really want more people dying there, more kids dying with the unexploded munitions throughout there? Do you want people living in tents for years and years? The American administration has said it's going to take 5, 10, 15 years to rebuild Gaza. So you want the people actually staying there? So I don't think it's a realistic plan. I think that they're really trying to shirk from their responsibility, as they've been doing all along, and not give the Gazans a place to go, instead holding them there as pawns, as they've been doing against the state of Israel.
Coming up, a chill wind of anti-Semitism picking up in the UK, driving some Jews to leave the country. Great Britain has long been regarded as a safe haven for the Jewish people. Since the October 7th attacks on Israel, however, anti-Semitic acts have skyrocketed. In fact, a recent poll shows that most British Jews have considered leaving the country. Dale Hurd brings us that story from London.
This is the United Kingdom that British Jews experience today.
Zionists, they are filthy animals.
Like obedient sheep, you obey Israel.
The whole condemning Hamas, I'm not going to condemn them, and Israel doesn't exist.
Most British Jews now no longer believe they have a future here. Recent polling has also found that most Jews hide their Jewishness in public and do not feel welcome in the United Kingdom. Gideon Falter is chief executive of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which commissioned the poll and has been documenting the rising Jew hatred.
A lot of people have talked about whether they have a future in this country. Do I think the Jewish community in the UK is going to evaporate? No. But I do think there is a sizable conversation now happening within the community of people saying, okay, is this the place that we've got a future?
There were nearly 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents reported in the first half of 2024, the highest number ever recorded for a 6-month period. 9 out of 10 British Jews say the government is not doing enough to stop the violence and discrimination.
I know some who have left. I know some who are actively, seriously looking at leaving.
Jewish investigative journalist David Collier tells us he constantly feels the anti-Jewish hate.
I get death threats every single day, but I'm also being contacted by Jews either who are having trouble at work, at home, students.
What brings you both out here today?
Well, just the amount of anti-Semitism we've had in Oxford for the past year has been really awful. We've had swastikas, we've had Jews being accused of weaponising anti-Semitism.
We've been told we're not welcome at the university.
Yeah, and it just...
down streets.
It's been escalating, and this is the big message. It's about the escalation, you know, it's getting gradually worse.
This in a nation where the adopted national song is Jerusalem. In the song Jerusalem, the British sing, "We will not cease till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land." But this Judeo-Christian connection that goes back centuries has begun to fray. Surveys show British Jews consider Islamists to be the most serious threat, and in a close second is the far left. Falter adds the nation's young people are being indoctrinated against Jews.
They are becoming radicalized on the internet. They are imbibing bigotries that their parents themselves don't have, and then they're teaching this from one kid to another kid. We've got a generation which is extremely hateful, and not just hateful, they're extremists.
Some non-Jews have seen the danger and are publicly supporting Britain's Jews. Mark Burbeck began the group Our Fight after he witnessed the lack of public support for Jews in Israel following the October 7th massacre.
Shock at the lack of empathy that people had for the Israeli people, the Jewish people, after October the 7th. In that period, a few of us were going to these vigils that were being organised by the Israeli community, and we sort of thought, we need to do something.
Another group supporting Britain's Jews is Christian Action Against Anti-Semitism, led by pastors Tim and Haley Gutman.
Our heart was to do something publicly that showed the Jewish people we stand with them, we love them, we're with them in solidarity. They're not alone, especially amidst this rising anti-Semitism.
David Collier is afraid demographics have already decided the future course of Britain's Jews. The most popular name for baby boys in Britain today is Mohammed.
It's a completely different country. The entire dynamic has changed, the entire atmosphere has changed, both towards Israel and in extension towards the Jewish community. It's completely different. It's a different country with a different demographic, a different outlook. Everything about it is different. You're talking to these Jewish people, and you know that things are only going to get worse for them, not better. There's no way back for the United Kingdom from this point. As far as I see it, no way back.
Falter has decided to stand and fight for the future, with the hope that more non-Jews will join him.
I think a lot of people don't realize how anti-Semitism relates to them. They don't see it as something that's going to actually hit home, hit them. Whatever happens with anti-Semitism in this country, if extremism continues to surge in the way that it is now, this country is in for dark days, and so is the West.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, London.
When we come back, straight talk at the Conservative Political Action Conference from the U.S. Ambassador Designate to the UN. When New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik questioned Ivy League college presidents in 2023 about anti-Semitism on campus, she established herself as a defender of free speech and for freedom from harassment on campus. At the recent Conservative Political Action Conference in Washington, D.C., she elaborated on her views on Israel, which will affect her work in the position she's been nominated for, U.S. Ambassador to the UN.
Now I want to ask you, Let me ask you this question. Do you all remember that famous congressional hearing with the anti-Semitic university presidents from Harvard and Penn? I should say former presidents after my questions. 5 down and so many to go. And mark my words, that hearing is the type of strong moral leadership that I will deliver at the United Nations on day 1. And I know that I will be serving as the United States ambassador to the United Nations and not the other way around. And I will always stand up for the American people, American sovereignty, and our America First values. That means I will always defend America's most precious ally, Israel. I led the charge to expose the rot of anti-Semitism on college campuses, and I will lead the charge on behalf of President Trump to root out the rot of the true den of anti-Semitism, and that is the UN. This past week, we continue to see with crystal clarity that our fight to support Israel and eradicate Hamas is a fight between good and evil, light and darkness, life and death. The hearts of the world shattered to learn the horrific fate of hostages Oded Lifshitz, Shiri Bibas, and her 2 precious sons, Kafir and Ariel. The world must never forget that Hamas terrorists savagely murdered over 1,200 innocent civilians, including women, children, the elderly, and babies, and took hundreds hostage, committing unspeakable atrocities against humanity on October 7th and thereafter. And as we learn more about Hamas's evil murder leading to this devastating loss of life of these innocent victims, we must be reminded that this must not be Israel's fight alone. It will never be Israel's fight alone. The absolutely heinous display of Hamas terrorists parading the coffins of murdered Israeli babies and lying about the remains of their mother to the cheers of a barbaric, animalistic pro-Hamas mob is an affront to all of humanity. And it has never been more important to show the world's unequivocal support for Israel, and it is clear that under President Trump's leadership, America stands steadfast in support of Israel and the Jewish people, and we will not rest until every hostage is brought home and Hamas is eradicated. At the UN, I will also work with President Trump, Secretary Marco Rubio, Elon Musk, and the DOGE team to ensure every single dollar that we send to the United Nations is in line with the founding mission of actually promoting international peace and security. We will not fund terrorism, we will not fund corruption, we will not fund anti-Semitism, and we will not fund anti-Americanism. The United Nations will hear loudly and clearly that President Trump's America First, Peace Through Strength agenda and record of results is back, and it is here to stay.
Still ahead, master violinist and worship leader Georgian Banov on finding inner peace during wartime. They traveled to garbage dumps, refugee camps, war-torn areas to essentially throw a party. Georgian and Winnie Banov, through their ministry Global Celebration, have ministered to people in difficult circumstances for decades. Just last week, they served up barbecue to IDF soldiers on the Gaza border. In his book, Joy, God's Secret Weapon for Every Believer, Georgian talks about what seems to be impossible, transcending hard moments to find joy. Our Middle East correspondent, Paul Strand, spoke with him about this idea. Here's their conversation.
Georgian, you've come to Israel at a time of great suffering. People are so sad about what Hamas has done as dead hostages have come out and all. What do you, as a man of God, say to a country like Israel at such a time?
There's always been difficulties our way, but it says that He ever leads us in a triumphant procession. So as difficult it is, and we're there with you, but we see God be able to move us and turn the mourning into joy, as Psalm 30 says. I really see it, and as difficult it is for us to feel it this way, but it's going to happen in mourning into joy. So,
you know, I think about David when he and his men came back and their enemy had taken everything, their families and all. Yeah. And David encouraged his soul. It said he encouraged his soul. And can we do that with joy? Is there, you would think most people would say joy is something that it just has to come up. It just has to bubble up automatically. It's not something you can control. But does the Bible suggest that we need to just push ourselves into joy, push ourselves into worship, and that those will be used as weapons on our behalf?
Yeah, in one way we could do that, but the way I deal with difficulties, the source for turning it into joy is Christ Himself, who is in me. And so I get even deeper into Him, not in a forceful way, but in a loving way, like He loves me, He loves us, and through giving to His hug, like yielding to, I find that in the rest of it, I actually don't strive, because it's almost counterproductive, even though it is feeling this way. But I feel like resting in Him, in His embrace, because He never lets me go. He never lets us go. And so I'm resting in His faithfulness, in His, and of course He's the one that has got the oil of gladness on Him. Mm-hmm. And so as I rest in Him, give myself into deeper love relationship, love embrace, intimate, then His oil begin to flow.
I know you've written a book about joy. Is joy a weapon, and how is it a weapon?
Joy is a weapon because it takes me out of the despair and takes me out of the emotional, soulish feelings into the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And in the Spirit, all of us, we're seated in heavenly places, and that is a place of, the rockets are falling from above, not trying to machine gun it from below, but in the Spirit, we see these rockets of joy falling, and that's the warfare that I'm in, being one with Him.
Also rest. I know the Bible, I think, man, we think we get to be adults. When we get to be adults, then we must strive, we must work hard, we must push. But is the Bible, when it talks about you need to come to me like a child, is God saying something to us about rest and relaxing in Him, that maybe we could live better lives if we weren't striving so hard?
Absolutely. Your father, we have children, and their kids never worry about a thing as long as we're around. Mm-hmm. And the same should be with us. And we around Him, and He's around us, and we go, our big dad. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I know your group, Global Celebration, you go all over the world, and you go to the poorest of people, and you hold feasts with lots of food and a lot of rejoicing, and you play the violin and you all sing and worship. What's your message to people when you're doing that?
Well, the message is that He's already paid in full for us to be delivered from this darkness, to be rescued from this world of darkness and transfer. And so coming to difficulties like garbage dumps sometimes, often we love that. Orphans, we have hundreds of orphans that in different continents, and we just bring that reality, that into their situation, and He's already prepared for us to be in His victory. Amen. And so that's how I look at it.
All right. Rejoice in the Lord always.
Always. And again I say,
rejoice. Thank you so much, Georgian Banov, Global Celebration.
Thank you for having me. God bless you. We love you guys so much.
That's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. And please, keep praying for the hostages still being held in Gaza, that they would all come home soon. And join us in praying for the peace of Jerusalem and that no weapon formed against Israel would prosper. Remember, the God who watches over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. For all of us here at the Jerusalem Bureau, we'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.